Hello, and welcome back for our second English lesson. And today we're going to be going over the structure of an Overcome the Monster story and how it's similar and different to our story mountain that we've looked at before, and the way in which we can use that to help us when we think about writing an Overcome the Monster story and keeping the suspense going throughout the story. The first thing we're going to do is a small write task. And what I want you to do is I want you to take these 4 sentences, and as you can see, they're really quite dull. There's nothing to them. There's no description. There's no action. There's no powerfulness to the sentence whatsoever. So what I want you to do, I want you to take each of these sentences, and I want you to add to them. I want you to improve that sentence in some way, shape, or form. Now, you could improve it by a lot. You could add detail around the sentence, maybe add another sentence or 2 to it. You could add to it by adding an adverbial starter or an adverbial phrase, a prepositional phrase, tell me where the action's taking place. You could change some of the words in the sentence to give it more detail, add detail in by adding adjectives into it, include a subordinate clause telling me additional information about what's happening in the sentence. There are so many things you can do to improve this sentence, and I want you to think through it, have a go, and on a piece of paper, make these sentences oh so much better. Pause now and give it a shot. Okay, so moving on, we're going to have a look at a standard story mountain, and this is similar to what I mean by that. Now, I've chosen this one in particular because there's a little bit more detail to it. And I think we're getting to the stage that rather than just seeing that 5-part story mountain, though it still has 5 parts, there's a little bit more to it, thinking through actually what each of those parts are. And I think as we're becoming slightly more sophisticated in our writing and we're wanting to push our own writing styles, we need to think about how we can use this to help us. So the story mountain starts in this case with the background knowledge or the beginning. So when this happens, you have to set the scene. You have to make sure that the reader knows about some of the characters within them, particularly your main character, where they are, when it's set, the world they're in, and the setting particular to them. And this is really important because in order for a reader to be involved with the story, they need to have an idea of where that story is taking place and be drawn into the details of that world, whether it is set in ours or whether it is set in a fantasy world or a sci-fi world or anywhere. Then you think about what's called rising action, or we call it build up in our story map. And this is where we think about the main events, the bits that lead us to the main part of our story. And sometimes, as you can see here, even those build-up parts, those rising actions, have peaks and troughs that they go through. Something happens, it gets resolved, and then something else starts happening again. And what the job of this is to do is first off to build a character. What you're doing is making that character more known to the reader, but also the reader more involved with that character or characters if it's a group of them. But also, you're still keeping that tension running all the way through. So the reader knows that it's building to something, but they're not sure when that main part will come. And this is a really important, really nice little skill in order to think about as you're doing it, because this is where you keep that reader going all the way through it. We think back to when we did the Jungle Book, and we talked about several moments that we picked out of the story. Our last one, the confrontation with Shere Khan, was actually the climax, was the main action in it. But each of the parts that we did otherwise were also these small building parts. It's where the main character normally grows or becomes better at something or has a better understanding about something else that's going on around it, and they overcome a small thing. Then we have the climax. And the climax is when we find the main problem of the story, the main thing that the hero is trying to overcome, or main character is trying to overcome, or it's where we find out the big thing that happens in that story. And this is the biggest course of action, the thing that changes the path of the story, the thing that brings it either to its conclusion or leads us down another path altogether. After you've done that, you have to have some way in order for that problem to become solved. And this is this falling action. This is this resolution that comes down off of the side of the climax, the side of our mountain, and leads all the way down to our ending, our conclusion or solution. And the reason you call it falling action is because you've reached the pinnacle of where your reader is all full of apprehension or all full of excitement, anticipation for something that's going to happen. And what you've done is you've given them the details and you've allowed that person to come back down before you finish the story. You don't always want to leave them, and particularly at the end of a story, on a cliffhanger. They have so many uses, and that climax almost is one of those points. But you need to know what's going to happen in order for you to feel completely done with that story. And that's where the conclusion, solution, or ending comes in. And it's when the problem is completely solved. It's the end of their quest if they're doing that. It's when they've reached the end of their journey. And it's really important we think about this in this terms. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and this is our base. And then we're going to think about how this fits in with a overcoming monster story and where there might be slight changes to it. And we'll talk about that as we go through. So this is our mountain before our overcome the creature or overcome the monster story. And you can see it's slightly different. You can still on this path along here go up and down much like you do in the other bits. And if you think about Beowulf, if we're thinking about Beowulf in its entirety, then there's 3 peaks that happen because it's actually a saga of 3 parts, and each part is a different peak. And realistically, you're talking about it being an overcome monster the entirety of the story, but each section of the story is also an overcome monster. And this happens in other cases as well. Now, we call them something slightly differently when we're talking about overcoming the monsters. It's still the same idea, but we can phrase it slightly differently just to get our idea around how it's different from a standard story mountain. So we start with anticipation. The idea is that you're building up the reader's anticipation of what's going to happen. So you talk about the monster, you talk about the hero, or you talk about a problem in a far off land, somewhere far enough away that the hero might have to go there or only hears about it and has to respond to it. And this could be by the people of the land. It could be that he's told of the problem via the gods. It could be that he is brought to the attention of it by himself, or something has brought attention to it to him. We lead after that into the dream state. And what this is more like an aspiration. It's what they want to do. So this is where the hero begins a journey, setting out to defeat the monster, whatever it happens to be. And this process includes his preparation for the battle or getting ready, also his expression of the goals. And what he means by that, what you mean by that is that we know during this part what he aims to achieve, what's his dream of achieving at the end. That's where the name comes from. And the monster still might be far enough away, whether this is in distance or whether this is in timing, but they are getting closer. You know that this confrontation is going to happen sometime soon, and it's either the monster coming towards the hero or the hero going towards the monster. And then we have what they have to say, the part we call frustration. And this is all about the battle beginning. And you'll notice that this actually isn't at the top of our peak. We'll come to that in a minute, but it's subtly different from that. So when they first meet on the battlefield and they first engage in combat or whatever they are going to do with this monster, this is where the reader and the hero, they start to doubt their ability to win. If they have to overcome such a large obstacle, that they might actually not win and they might fail in what they're trying to do. And this causes the reader to become invested in the hero. They want the hero to succeed. But in order for you to have that want, you have to feel like that hero has to do something to get there. And even when the odds are stacked against him, you still feel that want for him to succeed. Then we get to our climax, the top point. We call this nightmare. In this case, it could be called Climax, it could be called whatever you want it to. And this is that dark moment when everything seems to be going wrong, all hope is lost. And what you're doing to the reader then is you're really making them feel for that character. You make them feel like they might not succeed at all is lost. This must be the end. They can't surely overcome this problem. It is all going to end horribly wrong at this stage. This leads from the anticipation, increases suspense within the reader. It makes them want so badly for the hero to win, to overcome these difficult odds, that they've really, really invested in the story. And it's the investment in the story that makes people remember the story. So this is why this works so well, and why all Overcome the Monster stories work so well normally, because the reader really feels for they're really invested, they really feel for the hero, they really want them to succeed. And the reason why they are used so often is because people love hearing about it. They love hearing about somebody overcoming the odds, because really that's what they want to do at some point as well. And then we end with the miraculous escape, or the ending, or the conclusion. And this is where the tides turn, where it changes. Through some effort of the hero, whether it is how determined they are or how clever they are, or pure luck, they find a way to defeat the monster against all odds, against the fact that they might have been grievously injured by the monster moments beforehand. They find a way to get round the problem. And good finally triumphs over that evil. And you can see this is a sharp decline down to the end, because really you need to let that reader just breathe that sigh of relief after the end and leave it with them right at the very end, when quite often the hero gets some sort of reward, riches, or prize of some sort. So I want you to take a moment now, and I want you to think through stories that you know. Could be any stories, could be a film, could be a book that you think, or a story that you think follows this particular structure. And I want you to think about what parts link to which bit. So I'll give you an example. If we were to say Star Wars, for example, the majority of you might know that, but we'll talk through it. And we're talking about A New Hope, the very first one here. And within this story, there's lots of different arcs that happen, and we won't talk about all of them, because actually the main majority of it is a rags to riches story. But there is an Overcome the Monster in the majority of them. And the Overcome the Monster in this story is the story of the Death Star, and how it is such a nightmare, or such a monster. So it starts anticipation. We build the scene. We have this knowledge that there is these secret plans for a Death Star, the most powerful weapon the Empire owns, and it's been entrusted to these droids, which have been lost, almost captured, sent down to the planet of Tatooine. At which point they meet a young farm boy, Luke. And we set the scene. We get to know who Luke is at this stage, and he just is a normal boy for all we know, living on a farm, looks after anyone around him, including the droids when they turn up. Then we find out a bit more. We find out that actually there is this message in the droids about the secret plans of the Death Star, that if it aren't delivered, aren't going to be able to defeat this monster, the Death Star. So he has a dream that he needs to deliver them. He meets people that help him along the way, Obi-Wan Kenobi that teaches him about the Force, Han Solo who allows him to get there. Then we get to frustration. They get captured along the way, they rescue Princess Leia, they get stopped. But they still, even though they are on the Death Star, they see or know of the Death Star destroying a planet. They find out that it is almost indestructible from what they understand, and they escape. But in that escape, they actually leave the Death Star to the rebel base. And this is our nightmare situation. Against all odds, all these heroes go out to try and defeat the Death Star with only the smallest bit of hope. And there they are, flying, and the Death Star is getting gradually closer and closer and closer to destroying the rebel base. And right at the end, you see Luke down in the trench trying to defeat the Death Star, get that one final shot away. And in the spaceship behind him, he's just about to be shot down by Darth Vader. And it could all be over in that moment. Luke knows it, Darth Vader knows it, the Watcher knows it. And then a miraculous escape happens. Han Solo is able to stop Darth Vader. Luke gets his shot away and escapes, and the Death Star blows up. And it's in this moment you realize that actually all that tension that you build up in yourself has actually been relieved. And Luke and Han and Chewie are rewarded medals for their actions. And you can see that this arc could be related to lots of stories. To pause now, have a think about some that you know. See if you can see whether or not it follows this path. Pause now. Okay, so let's have a look at this in terms of Beowulf. So if we link this, how does this fit with our Beowulf? So we have anticipation. We find out that Beowulf hears about the beast that's been terrorizing Harut for 12 years now. And during his declaration, he travels to Harut and presents himself to Hrothgar, the king, and promises to defeat Grendel. And they all feel much more at ease because of this. And we get frustration, the beginning of the fight. Grendel appears and the fight begins, and Beowulf grabs hold of Grendel. And then we get the miraculous escape. And Beowulf pulls Grendel's arm off, and Grendel retreats back to his swamped lair, bleeding to death. Now we're missing a part, aren't we? We're missing the nightmare. What danger is there to Beowulf? Well, you're going to tell me. Your main task for today's lesson is to add that nightmare moment to our story. What could go so horribly wrong for Beowulf just before he succeeds? Does Grendel throw him off and attack him and cause him injury before Beowulf is able to grab his arm and rip it free? Or before even Beowulf grabs him, do they have a fight in which case nothing seems to hurt the Grendel, no weapon of man? Every sword that attacks him just seems to cut him, which heals again. Beowulf is losing the ability to know what to do. At which point he grabs Grendel. It's up to you. I want you to write the nightmare for our model text. What goes wrong? What leads us to that moment of bleakness just before we're relieved with Beowulf's actions? Have a go. See what you can do. And we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.